here's Brody Brazil.
We're now in this era of Major League Baseball where a lot of teams are talking about potential relocation to get stadium money that they otherwise wouldn't have, and they want to build not only the ballpark, but the surrounding ballpark village. Obviously, the Oakland A's are in this picture, the Los Angeles Angels are in that situation, the Chicago White Sox, the Kansas City Royals, and on and on and on. But it's easy to forget here and now that just about 20-something years ago, Major League Baseball was in a far different situation. They almost contracted by two teams. And specifically, the Montreal Expos and the Minnesota Twins were on the chopping block. I mean, the vote for them to be contracted actually happened. And yeah, Bud Selig was baseball's commissioner back then. He'll be prominently featured in this video. So kind of crazy that nobody even really directly remembers this as we now talk about sorting out teams so baseball can expand by even two more teams. I'll take it back to November 6th, 2001. So this is a couple weeks after the regular season had ended in 2001 and the World Series just ended. Major League Baseball owners, they actually voted 28-2 to eliminate two teams for the 2002 season. So we're not even talking about months of heads up or years of heads up. They literally said at the end of the 2001 season, as soon as it was done, we're voting to eliminate two teams before next season even starts. And back then, I mean, there was media coverage. There certainly wasn't social media. It wasn't like it is now. This would have been huge news for any major pro sports league to cut down by two instead of expanding by two. The Twins and the Expos were the expected teams to be eliminated. I'm not sure that it was ever officially documented in that vote, like here are the two, but baseball decided that they would eliminate two teams for 2002. By the way, the vote of 28-2, you can obviously figure out who the two dissenting votes were. It was the Twins and Expos. They cast the no votes in terms of contraction. But also, and this is interesting to revisit now, the Marlins, the Devil Rays, and the Oakland A's were also teams that were discussed for elimination. I also want to say that the Milwaukee Brewers might have been in there too, as I start to remember and refresh on all this. But a handful of teams, it kind of came down to the Twins and Expos. And again, this was about to happen so fast that two teams would just be gone. And the obvious reasons, and I don't mean the obvious reasons why there should have been contraction, I mean the obvious excuses of why contraction should happen back then. Funding problems, of course, to replace the Metrodome and Olympic Stadium. Doesn't it always come down to this? Like I said at the beginning of this video, it's always been a problem. They just handle it differently. Back then, they were like, well, we'll just get rid of two teams. That'll fix it. If we can't get new stadiums, we'll end those teams. Nowadays, they say, where can those two teams go? Where else can they get money? But funding problems were happening for both the Twins and the Expos. And so here's what Bud Selig, the commissioner, said back then, quote, the teams to be contracted had a long record of failing to generate enough revenues to operate a viable major league franchise. So money issues, funding issues, stadium issues, exactly what you would have expected. Now, if it happened, if it had went through, owners of both teams, the Expos and the Twins, would have received a $250 million buyout. Again, this is only at the end of 2001. You're talking about teams now with valuations of anywhere between $1 and $2 billion. Only about 20-something years later. So how regrettable would it have been to get bought out back at that time for $250 million, which I understand was probably market value then, but imagine it 20 years later. And if it also happened, they would have had to have realigned the division and the entire leagues. Here's exactly what they would have done to get to even amount of teams so that they can continue playing games. The Rangers would have went to the AL Central, the Pirates would have went to the NL East, and the Diamondbacks would have gone from the National League to the American League West. And again, this was only a handful of years after the Diamondbacks were even introduced into Major League Baseball. So that would have been the circumstances had all of this gone through. What saved it? How did this not happen? Well, quickly, MLBPA, the Players Association of Major League Baseball, they were not happy instantly. They filed a grievance literally the day after that vote in early November of 2001 to stop contraction. You know why? Because the Players Association exists with more players and more jobs and more opportunities, and when you cut 2 entire franchises. That's not only their rosters, but the minor league systems. I mean, that's a lot fewer jobs for baseball players. So obviously the PA was against that, and having no say and having it happen so quickly, they were very much against it. But here was the real turning point. 10 days later, after that vote, a Hennepin County judge in Minnesota ruled that the Minnesota Twins must honor their lease, right? So they had an existing lease and play their final season at the Metrodome, citing the team's importance to the community. So when the judge rules that, no, you have to honor this, you can't just contract and disband and be gone, well, that kind of makes it really difficult on Major League Baseball because they needed to eliminate 2 teams as a pair. Because if you don't eliminate 2 teams as a pair, you have an odd amount of teams. You need to be playing baseball games every day. The schedule for 162, guess what? It does not work in the baseball format with an odd amount of teams. So because contraction needed to happen as a pair, by December of 2001, they were already saying, you know what, contraction just isn't going to happen. And by January 12, 2002, Major League Baseball officially announced that contraction would not happen. So the Twins and the Expos, for now, were saved. But it was still the end of the Expos. January 16th, so right after contraction was thrown out the window, Jeffrey Loria sells the Expos to Major League Baseball for $120 million. So remember that $250 buyout? Well, he sells for $120 million, his part of it. Loria then goes on to buy the Marlins from John W. Henry for $158 million. John W. Henry buys the Boston Red Sox from the Yawkey Trust. It's musical chairs in terms of Major League Baseball ownership. But in all of this, there's a new CBA, and as part of that, it's established that contraction is guaranteed forbidden. Contraction will not happen until at least 2006. If they were going to do it, they won't do it by 2006. Obviously, mentalities and things changed by 2006. They never even talked about this again. But September of 2004, Major League Baseball, after buying the Expos 2 years prior, they announced that the Expos would be moving to Washington, D.C. for 2005. And again, September of 2004, that's the final month of the baseball season. It's announced, everything's done. We're packing up and leaving after this season. I don't think it was a surprise to Expos fans, but the rug was pulled quickly under the Montreal fans at the end of 2004 and into 2005. The Twins, as you know, were saved. May of 2006, Minnesota Governor Tim Pawlenty approved $522 million in a ballpark for the Twins. The team agrees to contribute $130 million of 522. Man, that's just the prices back then. You're talking about teams nowadays spending $500 million, $1 billion, $1.5 billion, really $2 billion all on their own if they want to fund a stadium privately. But the team agrees to contribute $130 million, and because of that, they get beautiful Target Field, which opened in April of 2010, and the Minnesota Twins have never looked back, so they're saved in Minnesota. But again, an interesting evolution of Major League Baseball going from the days of, well, we just can't get it done, so we're going to fold these 2 teams, to now turning the pressure on local entities of government, of city and county municipalities and saying, well, if you don't do this for us, we'll just move. They're not going to contract teams anymore. They're just going to move them. That's the end of this video. I really appreciate you making it to the end. If you would, real quick, I would like it if you like this video. Thumbs up down below. That greatly helps me in this video and this channel. But I would love it even more if you just go down there real quick. Make sure you've already hit that subscribe button. If you subscribe to this channel, that means I definitely get to see you back here next time.